Hello and welcome back to the Tik-A Tee Method. My name is Ron Castingway. An important aspect of sight reading is to understand what I call road signs in music, or what I sometimes refer to as song mapping. So what do I mean when I say road signs and song mapping? I'm speaking specifically about things like repeat signs. Maybe there's a first ending, a second ending, a third ending, or more in your music. You need to understand how that functions in music notation. Maybe there's a single bar repeat or a double bar repeat symbol. We need to know what that means. Or towards the end of the piece, maybe there's some fancy Italian lingo that we need to understand, like dal segno al coda or da capo al fine, often abbreviated as DS al coda or DC al fine. We need to know what this all means. So today's video for week 35 is not necessarily focusing on a rhythmic concept per se, but it is very much focusing on how to sight read a piece of music and understand its song mapping. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right, here we are on the first page of week 35. I'm going to hone in first on repeat signs. So let's look at this little 2-measure excerpt at the very top of the page. The first thing we want to recognize is, what does a repeat sign look like in music notation? Well, here it is. I'm going to circle it. This one is called a left repeat sign. It looks like a thick bar line followed by a thin bar line followed by 2 dots in the middle of the staff. That's a left repeat sign. Now, if we go all the way to the other side, this one here that I just circled, we can probably guess that that's called a right repeat sign. This one is 2 dots in the middle of the staff, followed by a thin bar line, followed by a thick bar line. Now, the way that repeat signs work is everything in between a left repeat sign and a right repeat sign will repeat itself one time and then move on in the music. So let's assume that this is a 4/4 excerpt. Now there's no time signature, but let's just assume that this is in 4/4. Here's what this would sound like with the repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, ta, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta, ta. Then I repeat it. Ta, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta, ta. So again, you have a left repeat sign and a right repeat sign. Everything in between those 2 repeat signs, all of that music, this is just 2 measures, but there could of course be more. Everything between those 2 repeat signs will repeat one time and then move on. Now, depending upon the music notation software that a composer, an arranger, or a publisher uses, sometimes repeat signs can look a little bit more fancy by adding a curved bracket at the top and bottom or a straight bracket at the top or the bottom. But you'll notice that the fundamental thick bar line, thin bar line, and 2 dots are still there. It's important to note that even though these repeat signs look a little bit different, a little bit more fancy, they are the same thing. All right, now let's move down the page a little bit and talk about first and second endings and how they're utilized with repeat signs. I'm going to talk about this excerpt first, this one right here that I just drew an arrow next to. You will notice that there is indeed a right repeat sign. I just circled it. But let me ask you a question. Do you see a left repeat sign? No, you do not. In music, when there is only a right repeat sign, that means that the musician will go back to the beginning of the song and repeat that music. We do not add a left repeat sign at the very beginning of a song because it's redundant and it can become a little bit confusing. So when a composer wants a musician to repeat back to the beginning of the song, they only need to utilize a right repeat sign, and that means that the musician will go back to the beginning. Now, let's get into the first and second ending. How does that work in this excerpt? Before I get into the practical application of first and second endings with repeat signs, let's first talk about why. why do we have first and second endings in music? The quick and easy answer is this. A phrase or a melody may end in a very specific way the first time, melodically and or harmonically. Then that phrase will repeat itself, and the ending of that phrase may be different, either harmonically and or melodically. That's where the use of first and second endings come into play. I'm going to use some color coding in a moment to explain exactly how this excerpt would be performed, but let's talk through it one time. The musician looking at this little excerpt would perform the first and the second measure being the first ending. Then we'll notice the repeat sign go back to the beginning, perform the first measure, but not go into the first ending. You need to then jump past the first ending, start at the second ending, and perform that measure, and then go on from there. So if that's a little bit confusing, let's show you with some color coding here. I'm going to use green for the first time. So the musician will perform measures 1 and 2 up to that repeat symbol. Then they will repeat back to the beginning. Let's switch over to red here, and I'll go on the top. And they're going to perform the first measure, but we're not going to re-perform the first ending. We need to jump over the first ending to the second ending. That's why it's called the second ending. So the musician will then jump over the first ending and go directly to the second ending, and then go on from there. Now, are all first and second endings just one measure long? Absolutely not. First and second endings can be a multitude of measure lengths. It just depends on the song, the phrase, the melody, and the reasoning behind why there is a first and a second ending. I hope that makes sense. All right, to eliminate any potential confusion that's still out there, let me perform this excerpt for you, observing the first and the second ending. I'm going to give myself a 1-measure count off. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ta. So you could hear there how when I took that repeat, I just performed the first measure, then I leaped over that first ending and went right to the second ending. This is a technique that musicians really have to get used to when you have first and second endings. You perform that first ending only one time, and then you repeat and you jump past that first ending directly to the second ending. Sometimes that's tricky to do in the beginning stages of sight reading, but that is how repeat signs, first and second endings work. Now let's go to this next excerpt right beneath that one, and I want you to notice it looks almost identical. Time signature, rhythm, placement of the repeat sign, placement of the endings. However, that's where the slight difference lies, and this is what musicians need to notice. Under that first ending bracket, you'll see a 1, 2, and a 3, and under that second ending bracket, you will see a 4. Now, this is pretty straightforward and pretty logical. You are actually going to repeat that first ending 3 times. The first time, the second time, and the third time, before you then leap over and go into the second ending, or in this case, it will be the fourth ending. So you're actually going to repeat that first ending 3 times before you make the leap, before you make the jump into that next and final ending. So let me just demonstrate this one right away for you, and I'll go a little bit faster so we can get through it with all of these endings so you can see it. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ta. All right, so there it is. I repeated underneath that first bracket 3 times, the first ending, the second ending, and the third ending. I went back to the beginning each time. Then the last time, after that third repeat, I went back to the beginning. Then I made the leap over that first, second, and third ending to the fourth ending, and then moved on from there. So you can have multiple endings like this, 1, 2, 3, and then a 4, like in this case. You will see this in music. Although not as common, we as musicians, especially sight reading, have to be aware of these things. Now, let's move to the bottom of the page because I want us to be able to recognize two more symbols that are used as repetition in music, but it's not a repeat sign. It's a single measure repeat symbol and a double measure repeat symbol. So let's look at number 1 right here. We've got a nice little 4/4 excerpt here. Tee, tee, taw, tee, taw, tee. Nice little rhythm, followed by, in the second measure, a single measure repeat symbol. This is simply a shorthand way of saying, hey, repeat that previous measure one more time without the music notation cluttering up the page. So again, it's kind of like a shorthand symbol. So this excerpt would sound like this. Tee, tee, taw, tee, taw, tee, 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 taw, tee, taw, tee. And you'll see these single measure repeat symbols oftentimes in music where there's a lot of repetition in a part. It might be an ostinato or it might be in a percussion part. So you'll see it there. If we look now at number 2, we'll see that it's pretty similar, except we have 2 measures followed by a 2 measure repeat symbol. So it applies the same way. It's very logical. It's very self-explanatory. We're going to perform those first 2 measures, and then because of that 2 measure repeat symbol, we're going to repeat those 2 measures again. Let me demonstrate excerpt number 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tee, Tik-A, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, a tee, tee, taw, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, 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 Tik-A, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, a tee, tee, taw, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, tee. And there it is, another form of shorthand. This time, instead of repeating 1 measure, we're repeating 2 measures. I hope these make sense. Now, let's go find an exercise. Now, since we've already done the first ending and the second ending in some detail above, let's go find an exercise that has repeat signs, single measure repeat symbols, and double measure repeat symbols all in one exercise. Let's go find it. All right, here we are. And just to make it a little bit more fun, we are not in common time anymore, Toto. Here we are. It is 6/8. We've got some compound duple. Now, I am not going to analyze the rhythms in this exercise because week 35 is about understanding the navigation, the song mapping, the repeat signs, the 1 measure repeat symbols, and the 2 measure repeat symbols, for example, in this particular exercise. So let's get to the analysis. And in the first measure, we have some very common compound duple rhythms. So let's go to the second measure where we see a 1 measure repeat symbol, which again simply means repeat the previous measure. And in this case, it's measure 1. Now, looking forward, we have this symbol right here, which may look a little confusing at first, but all it is a right repeat sign connected to or combined with a left repeat sign. And the one that we're going to focus on first, of course, is the right repeat sign with the 2 dots facing towards the beginning. Notice we do not have a left repeat sign at the beginning of the song. And remember what I said previously. When you have a right repeat sign with no left repeat sign, it means to go back to the beginning of the song, which is exactly what we'll do here. So we'll perform the first 2 measures and then repeat back to the beginning and repeat those 2 measures again before moving on to measures 3 and 4 right here. And you'll notice now we have a left repeat sign here and a right repeat sign right here. So those 2 measures are going to repeat before we move on. And in those 2 measures, we have some very straightforward compound duple rhythms that should be very, very accessible. Again, we're working on the navigation here. Let's go to line number 2. And the second line starts off with a left repeat sign right here, meaning that we are going to have some music on this line that repeats. Measures 5 and 6 right here are some really cool, some really fun compound duple rhythms that should, again, be pretty straightforward because we've gone over it before in the book. Then we close off here in measures 7 and 8 with a 2 measure repeat symbol, meaning that we're just going to simply repeat measures 5 and 6 again. The exercise closes off with a right repeat sign. meaning that everything between that left repeat sign and the right repeat sign, including that 2-measure repeat symbol, we have to repeat one time before we can close off this exercise. And if you look at the top right here, it says that this exercise has multiple repeat signs and measure repeats, and it actually results in a 16-measure exercise. So even though it's just 8 distinct measures in and of itself, because of the repeat signs, it turns into a 16-measure exercise. Pretty cool. And you know what time it is now. I need to perform this exercise. Now, I strongly suggest and encourage that you use a metronome at a tempo that's comfortable for you when sight reading and performing these exercises. I am just going to use the snapping of my fingers to represent the dotted quarter note in this case so that we can get through it. The more advanced we become in the book, I think the more you understand that you need to use a metronome, and I'm just going to act like a metronome by snapping my fingers and keeping that dotted quarter note pulse as consistent as I can. All right, let's do this 8-measure / 16-measure exercise. I'll give myself a 1-measure count off. Here's my G. La, la, la. Here we go. Actually, a 2-measure count off. 1, 2, ready, and ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, ti, Tik-A Tee, ti, ti, Tik-A, 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 ti, ti, Tik-A Tee, ti, ti, Tik-A, 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 ti, ti, Tik-A Tee, ti, ti, Tik-A, 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 ti, ti, Tik-A Tee, ti, ti, Tik-A, Tik-A, Tik-A. And there it is. Now I went a little bit faster just to demonstrate this exercise as quickly as I could so that you could see how the flow of this exercise works with those single and double measure repeat symbols, as well as the multiple repeat signs that are incorporated into this exercise. Okay, now that we've vocalized it, now that we've sight read it, the next step that we need to take is to go to my website and find the MP3 quote-unquote answer for exercise 35G. However, for today's video, I'm going to change it up just a little bit because I took the MP3 from exercise 35G and I had a little bit of fun in Logic creating 3-part harmony from one vocal line using some pitch control and creating a little bit of a drum groove. So I'm going to show you that instead of going to my website to check out the MP3, but it actually is the MP3 altered, including the tempo. It's a little bit faster. Anyway, I want you guys to have fun with these exercises. Be creative when you perform them. It makes rhythm way more fun to practice, and ultimately, it actually helps you solidify the rhythm concepts for each week when you get creative and you have fun with the exercises. And that's what I try to do too. So check out how much fun I had here with the MP3 for exercise 35G. I hope you enjoy. 1, 2, ready, and. Ta ti 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 ta ti 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 ta ti 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 ta ti 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 ta ti ti Tik-A Tee ti ti Tik-A 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 ti ti Tik-A Tee ti ti Tik-A 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 ti ti Tik-A Tee ti ti Tik-A 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 ti ti Tik-A Tee ti ti Tik-A Tik-A Tik-A. And now on to some more navigation tools used in music notation, things that I like to refer to as song mapping. And inside this box, you'll notice that there are symbols as well as abbreviations and Italian terminology. So I'm going to go through all of these terms and symbols, and then I'll show you how they work in some excerpts and some examples, and how they help musicians navigate the form of songs. All right, so I'm just going to go through these terms inside this box, starting at the top, and then I'll show you what they look like in an actual exercise or excerpt of music. But let's explain them first. The first one is DC al fine. Now, DC is an abbreviation for the Italian terms da capo, which means to the head. And in music, that means to the beginning of the song. And a lot of times in jazz, for example, you'll see musicians point to their head or say, hey, let's take it from the head. That means the beginning of the song. So wherever you see DC al fine in your music, it means go back to the beginning and perform the music until you see the word fine marked at the end of one of the measures. That's where you'll actually stop, and there will usually be a double bar line as an indicator in addition to the word fine. The next one says DC al coda. Now we already know that DC means da capo, to the head, to the beginning of the song. Al coda simply means to the tail. So the coda is a separate section of music that publishers almost always put at the end of the song. So you are going to, as a musician, go back to the beginning of the song. You're going to perform until you see the words to coda, and sometimes they'll include the symbol there as well. Then you will go to the end of the song and you'll see the coda symbol, which represents the tail end of the song. That's usually the closing music of the song. And codas can be as short as one measure or as long as 2 or more pages of music. So it just depends on the song that you're playing. But DC al coda means to go back to the head or the beginning, perform until you see the words to coda, and then you jump to the coda section of the music, and that will be represented by the coda symbol. The next one says DS al fine. So instead of going to the beginning, DS stands for dal segno, to the sign. So you're not going to go back to the beginning, you're going to look for the sign, dal segno. You're going to perform from the sign until you see fine marked in the music, again, usually with a double bar line, but not always, and that's where you'll stop. The next one down says DS al coda. So just like DC al coda, instead of going to the beginning, DS, dal segno, you're going to go from the sign. So you need to find that sign, dal segno. You need to find that sign. You're going to go from the sign, and then you are going to perform the music until you see the words to coda marked above a measure. And at the end of that measure, you're going to jump to the tail of the song, which is the coda. You're going to find that coda symbol and perform the remaining part, the ending music of the song. The next one down says to coda. This is what will actually be marked in the music for a DS al coda or a DC al coda. This tells the musician at the end of this measure, you need to jump to the tail of the song and you need to go find that coda symbol that represents the closing music of the song. So it will literally say to coda when you're supposed to go to the coda. And of course, the next one down, fine. Could it be any more simple? This is where the song ends. Okay, this is the closing, the ending, the finish of the song. Italian, fine. So at the end of that measure, where the fine is marked, that's where you'll actually stop performing. And the next one down is a symbol, dal segno. Okay, this is the sign that is represented through the DS al fine or the DS al coda. This is the symbol, this is the sign that you as a musician are looking for when you see a DS al fine or a DS al coda. That's where you're going to go back to and perform from there. And the last one in this box is the coda symbol itself. So this is the tail of the song. This is the symbol you're looking for in a DC al coda or a DS al coda situation. When it says to coda, this is the symbol you're looking for that will represent the tail end or the closing music of the song. All right, now that I've gone over all the terms inside this box, I'm going to show you a bunch of exercises here, and I'm not going to perform them, but I am going to use my marker to just show you what the navigation represents, what these song mapping symbols and verbiage and abbreviations all mean when it's applied to an exercise. And you'll notice that the music, the rhythms, are all the same in every single exercise. But because the navigation changes, the numbers of measures in each exercise actually changes, and how you perform each exercise actually changes because the song mapping changes. All right, so let's look at exercise 35H here. This is a DS al coda situation. So I'm just going to use my marker here. I'm going to be the musician, and I'm just going to draw lines through the measures that we perform, and I'll color code when we need to jump. Okay, here we go. So we start at the beginning, and we're going to perform all the way, continuing through here, and all the way continuing to here. Now, we have a DS al coda and a double bar line. Dal segno al coda. So we're going to go back to the sign until we see to coda. So let's just do this in red. So I'm going to go back to the sign, which is right here, and I'm going to perform this music until I see to coda. And at the end of this measure where it says to coda, my eyes have to jump and find the coda symbol. And we'll look for that in green right down here. So I'm going to actually go from the end of this measure, and I'm going to jump down to the coda and perform the coda to the end. Remember, coda basically means tail in Italian, which represents the ending of the song. And most songs that have a coda, they will definitely end at the end of that coda. And remember, codas can be one measure or multiple measures. In this case, what do we have? 4-measure coda here, and then the song ends. So hopefully this helps you navigate a DS al coda situation. All right, let's look at 35I. Now this is a DC al coda situation. So DC means da capo, to the head, to the beginning. So I'm going to do the same exact thing with my navigation tools here, and I'm just going to use a marker to demonstrate where I'm going to be performing the music and how it will be performed and navigated. Here we go. So from the beginning, I'm going to perform all of this music right here. I'm going to continue through here. I'm going to continue all the way until it says DC al coda, and I've got a double bar line here that helps us navigate as well. Represents there's going to be a change in the music. DC, I'm going to go back to the beginning until I see the words to coda. Let's do that in red. All right, so I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to perform these measures again until I see to coda. And then my eyes have to find that coda symbol, and I'll do that in green again. So at the end of this measure, my eyes are going to jump to this coda symbol and perform the remaining 4 measures from there. So in the first exercise, we had a DS al coda to the sign. This one is a DC al coda. So from the beginning until the coda symbol. So there's some similarities here, but just enough difference to make it really important to understand the difference between DC and DS. All right, let's move to the bottom of the page here, exercise 35J. I'm going to do the same exact thing, just use my marker to navigate through the music. Now, this is a DC al fine situation. So here we go. We're going to start at the beginning. We're going to perform all the way through here, all the way through here, all the way through here, and all the way through here until we get to DC al fine. And again, we've got a double bar line here that represents some sort of change in the music, which is very, very helpful. DC, da capo, to the head. So we're going to go back to the beginning until we see fine marked in the music, and that's where the song will end. So I'll do that in red. I'm going to go back to the beginning, perform all of this, perform all of this, and perform all the way until it says fine. And at the end of that measure, I'm going to stop. Now, there's not a double bar line there. Sometimes there is, sometimes there aren't. But regardless, at the end of the measure where fine is marked, that's where the song stops. All right, moving on to exercise 35K. This is a DS al fine situation. So let's navigate. Here we go. I'm going to use, let's use the blue one again here to start. So we are going to start at the beginning, go all the way through here, all the way through here, all the way through here, and all the way up until we see DS al fine and that double bar line. DS, del segno, from the sign. So we need to find that sign and perform from the sign until we see fine marked in the music. So let's change to red. I found my sign. Here it is. I'm going to perform from there until I see fine marked in the measure. So I'm just going to keep going. And there it is. There's my fine. So at the end of that measure, that's where this song is going to end. All right, now 35L at the bottom of the page here has no special symbols or Italian terminology, but there is a first and a second ending. So I'm just going to do this last exercise here for this video and do the same exact thing. I'll just mark it up with my marker so that you can see exactly how it should be performed. So let's start off with blue here. For 35L, I'm going to perform from the beginning, go all the way through here, all the way through here, and all the way into the first ending until this repeat sign right here, which is going to take me where? It's going to take me back to the beginning because all I have is a right repeat sign. I do not have a left anywhere, which implies that we're going all the way back to the beginning. We're going to leap over that first ending and jump right to the second ending. Let's change to red. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to perform all of this, and then these two measures. Now I'm going to stop at that first ending and leap. I need to jump to the second ending, which is right down here. And then I'll perform the second ending, in this case, to the end. Remember, when you have a first and a second ending, you only perform the first ending the first time. Then when you get to that first ending, you need to jump it, leap it, and get to that second ending. And then in this case, the song actually concludes after that. So some more navigation here to help you out. All right, wow, that was a lot of information for one video. So if you need to rewatch anything, please go back and do so and check it out. Make sure you understand the concepts and don't hesitate to shoot me out an email, a DM, or a comment so I can answer any questions that you might have. And of course, I encourage you to go out and do all of these exercises by getting my book, Rhythmic Sight-Reading, the Tik-A Tee Method. It is available at my website, roncastingway.com. It is also available through Amazon and J.W. Pepper. And if you found this video helpful, please help out the channel, the Tik-A Tee Method, by hitting that like and subscribe button and that notification bell so you get the latest video. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I know it wasn't a rhythmic video per se, but it's definitely important to understand all of these road symbols, I like to call them, and this song mapping and these navigation tools, because sight reading music is more than just the rhythm, right? There's melody, there's navigation, there's song form, there's all these things that are included in sight reading. That's why it's towards the end of the book, because this is really important stuff too. We can't just be sight reading the rhythms and the melodies and the harmonies. We've got to know when they happen. And if there's navigation that needs to be had by a musician, then we need to understand what all those symbols and that terminology, be it Italian or not, what it all means and how we do it. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me for week 35. I'm super excited for week 36. It is near and dear to my heart when I adapt the Tik-A Tee method to swing. I can't wait. I'll see you then.